Hello, everybody. It's Alex Wilson-Campbell from the Remote Work Life podcast. Joining me today, I have a wonderful guest. I have Luke Shermer. Luke is the managing director and founder of Launch Tomorrow, and he has such a depth of knowledge when it comes to remote work, but not just remote work. And I'm going to let him sort of give you a bit more detail in a moment. But we've been speaking for a little while, and I just really wanted to have Luke on the podcast today to share with you all he's learned, I guess, or much of what he's learned about remote work. And Luke, he's managed and participated in remote work and remote-only knowledge work teams for almost a decade. Most recently, he led a program, approximately 30 distributed across. I'm making real messages today. I'm really sorry. Oh, dear me.
That's all right.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Do you mind if I start again?
Let's start from the top. No problem.
Okay. Sorry about this.
It's mostly you talking, so I don't mind.
Right. He's managed. I've practiced this so many times and I can't get it right. I've managed in remote-only knowledge work teams for almost a decade. Most recently, he led a program of approximately 30 distributed. So that should be. There's a typo there. 30 distributed. Is that people?
People, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I might have typed it not quite. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think I've actually read it out loud myself. Come to think of it, so it may be actually a hard one to read.
Do you want me to go? Do you want me to do something else then in terms of the intro, or are you happy with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whatever. Okay. However you want to do it, I think, and yeah, especially if it's coming from you, I think that's even better.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I know it's missing. Align remotely. Right. Hi guys, it's Alex once again from Remote Work Life. Thank you for joining me once again. Today I have another special guest. I have with me today Luke Shermer. Now, Luke has been in the world of remote work for a number of years. And as you know, we only really accept and speak to people who have an in-depth knowledge in remote work, because I think that's the way we can learn best, and how we can, through sharing what we've learned, sharing what we practice on a day-to-day basis, from learning from those who know the world of remote work best. And Luke has managed or participated in remote-only knowledge work teams for almost a decade. And most recently, he led a program of approximately 30 distributed people across 13 time zones and 8 different locations. Over the last 9 years, he's led teams building software, running marketing and sales, and launched a best-selling book as well at the same time called Align Remotely. So look out for that. In many cases, with people he's been working with, he's never met them or spoke to them in person. And I mean, that's something really special in terms of the whole lot, in terms of what Luke has done, which, as I said, why I wanted to get him on the program today. So Luke, thank you for joining us today, and you're very, very welcome.
Yeah, Alex, it's really a great pleasure. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, so I'm glad to chat.
And Luke not only is he a fellow podcaster as well, actually. I think what you should do as well is look out for Luke at Launch Tomorrow. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as the show goes on. But Launch Tomorrow is Luke's main venture at the moment. And today, on today's show, we're going to talk about why companies struggle with remote productivity. That's a big topic. I mean, especially in an office, productivity tends to be monitored at an individual level, but actually the impact on a business depends on how well teams work together. And I think, Luke, I think you can really share some of your pearls of wisdom with us today to kind of reveal not only how you do it, but also how many of the people many of the businesses that you work with are doing it as well. So it's brilliant.
Absolutely.
But my first question, did you envision, can't get my words out, envision yourself in your current role? And I mean, tell us how you reached where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. So I was at one company for many years that became increasingly remote, and kind of worked through various roles there over time. Initially, I was more of a line contributor, eventually became more of a manager, and got remote teams to run, initially small teams and larger teams. And I think pre-pandemic, most of the people that I talked to, if we were talking about work over beers or something, they were just amazed or surprised that it's possible to run remote teams and build complex things like software, like with everybody completely remote. Well, at least outside of the software industry, to be fair. And then basically, like as soon as the pandemic hit, it was like I felt like I had a lot of experience built up over the years, or scar tissue, however you want to call it. And these were things that I thought would be helpful for people, because at the time there was lots of listicles of 37 tools to help you go remote. Kind of, if you think back to like March or April of last year, there was like a whole bunch of things like that. And I think in practice, I felt other things were actually more important, that eventually people would kind of realize that, or come across certain things which I'd already experienced in the past, which I could help share with. And I think the key thing, actually, I think for me, was the mindset that that productivity as a team matters a lot more than as an individual. And I think in an office, it's easy to kind of fall back to, are people showing up? Are they sitting at their computer? Are they doing things? And for some type of work, maybe that's good enough. But I think especially when you're in a remote setting, you've got to get kind of deeper into how the actual team works together to really get to the bottom of how to get things done, basically.
Mm-hmm. So for you then, when you started working remotely, was that by design, or was it just your preference? Was that your preference, or by design?
It was kind of by accident. So what happened was that I realized that I was working with a team of remote people sitting in London. And in fact, I think at one point, even though I had, I think at the time, around 13 people, I was the only one in London. And for personal reasons, we thought it would be good to move back to Warsaw to be closer to family. I have a daughter. Wanted her to have closer contact to family. And, in fact, it was completely optional that I was physically in London. I mean, some of my stakeholders were there, but I agreed with them that I'd fly in when needed, and set up a couple of flights after I moved. But it just kind of evolved from there, and then it just became the way things worked while I was with this company full time, and then over time it evolved out into just doing various bits of kind of remote work, remote consulting, and it kind of went from there. So,
and as with many people when they're starting out remote, not just individuals but teams, there can be various challenges, I guess, various different things that remote work can sort of throw up, I guess, sometimes unexpectedly. What's been your biggest challenge, and how have you been able to overcome that to really build the business that you built today?
I think the biggest challenge, especially initially, was around shifting the culture that I was in, the company culture that I was in, which is relatively, let's say, traditional and hierarchical, into accepting more things like facilitation. And part of that was just things that I was doing outside with other companies and bringing it in kind of on the side. And part of that was just me literally stepping out of my own, for lack of a better term, comfort zone, kind of being within the way things are and being willing to change things and push things a bit. And I think, in a way, this is one of the ways the pandemic has actually been a good thing, because I think a lot of the assumptions that were very entrenched that I had to work against, I think, were put into question. So it was easier to do that. I think also by the time this was happening last year, the tools to be able to do that, to facilitate group meetings, workshops online, were much more mature than they were, say, 5 years ago, for example, where you have big online whiteboards and you can fully kind of prototype, plan out entire, complicated systems admittedly on a call together, but you can really get into quite deep things. And there's certain things you lose doing this online versus in person, but there's also a lot of things you gain. And to some extent it's tools, but it's also just this whole idea that as a manager, my primary role, my mindset was that I need to be a facilitator and not kind of an executor. And I think particularly in a remote context, that really helps a lot, where, you assume people want to be there, they want to be doing their job, and it's all about helping them come together to achieve what it is that the company wants them to achieve. And of course, if there are blockers, then go figure out what they are together, and then, try to unblock it for them or help them do it themselves, that kind of thing. So it is a slightly different mindset, and to some extent skill set too.
Yeah, and I think, well, the fact that you evolved into that manager is yeah, it is a mindset, but also I suppose you have to be willing to change as well, don't you, in terms of the way you were and the way you are. So there's that challenge as well. I think one of my biggest challenges when I first started working remotely was the perception that my clients had of me not having an office. So when I told them, I work remotely, I work from here, literally here, there, and everywhere. So the first question to me would be, so where's your office? How can we sort of get in touch with you? And I said, well, you can use my phone, or you can Skype me, or you can use, Zoom, that sort of thing. That was one of my biggest challenges. But obviously, that's now no longer a challenge, because literally everybody's working remotely. Yeah,
exactly.
But no, that's interesting. Yours was more around sort of the mindset and the facilitation as opposed to managerial side. And I think a lot of people actually now still, a lot of managers are coming to terms with that. Trying to be, I suppose it takes being a bit more, I suppose at the heart of it takes trust, doesn't it? Trusting who you work with, trusting your team. Would you say?
Yes, it does. It takes trust. It takes it does take skills, although you can learn them as you go. I think also. So I think, yeah. I think with the trust, speaking of trust, I think with the trust component, I think one of the big challenges with trust is in an environment where you don't have very clear objectives, or there's like multiple people that are trying to define what the company's supposed to do. It's not very clear. Therefore, it's not clear who's accountable. It's not clear how things are going to happen. And then in that context, it's very difficult to have a trusting relationship in every direction, above you and below you, so to speak. Because then it's like, what is it that people are actually doing? Are they actually doing it? Are they doing something that matters? Like you've got to work out how to get that trust. And I think, the easiest way that I've managed to do that is to always, every time I get into this kind of a situation, is to, as quickly as possible, first of all, clarify the objectives so everyone is clear on what it is that's going on. And usually it's just like getting things to be internally consistent and like really kind of string people at the initial meetings to figure out, how it all comes together. And then in terms of the actual trust bit, it's trying to divide up the work into small enough pieces that you can see that people are working through them, they're collaborating to kind of work through each of the pieces and to allow them to come together and create the space for them to come together when needed, but not force them to be in, Zoom doom and monitoring and because that if anything it erodes trust, right? It's a sign of lack of trust, so to speak. And I mean, I think meetings in general are kind of they're not corporate culture. They're not the only part of corporate culture, but I think they're the most visible part and the one that's the most related to how an employee experiences a company culture. And that kind of goes back to why I think that facilitation is so important, because I think if you, I mean, of course, not every meeting needs to be a workshop, right? but I mean, more just that when you are organizing a meeting, it's planned, it's thought through, workshop participant, like meeting participants, figuring out exactly how it needs to work during the whole thing. And creating a space for people to explore, and then on the flip side, coming to a decision. I mean, to some extent, this is similar to running a normal meeting, but when you move it into an online environment, there's it is a different experience than when you're all in a room together. And then being able to use things like, for example, going back to whiteboards, right? So you've got people, there could be one person talking, a couple of people updating Post-its, another person organizing, making like arrows or boxes or something. And so it's like this multimedia experience, right? You've got the visual, you've got things moving, you're touching things, you're moving things around, and everyone's doing it at once, right? Whereas if you just have, the Brady Bunch style Zoom setup, and one person speaks for a minute at a time, like most people are going to be disconnecting because they just, it just doesn't feel as relevant. They don't feel like they're part of it. Whereas if you really create a space where people can all take action at the same time and talk about things at the same time and really get at, what's the actual problem we're solving, how are we going to do it, then that I think eventually leads to a much better experience for employees, but also better outcomes really for the company too.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of companies, not just the ones that are newly remote, but even the existing ones that are continually learning how to do things, how to work best, and there's a lot of collaboration where that's concerned. And again, when I first started working remote, I was mostly working remotely alone. A lot of the things, but I mean, obviously working alone, but working within sort of collaborating with different areas and different people. A lot of the things that I did, or I suppose the IT I used, or the ways in which I worked, I learned as I went along, and often made mistakes myself, quite big mistakes sometimes. And there came a point actually where I became really isolated and felt like I was just sort of, I don't know, stagnating in my learning. And it was only through, I suppose, in a way, by accident, I started to sort of reach out to other people, to speak to them and learn about what they were doing. And in fact, this is how the Remote Work-Life podcast came about, through those conversations. And that's how I sort of continue to learn. How do you, in your sort of context, how do you continue with your learning and your development?
Yeah. I mean, so the two main topics that I focus on are innovation or new product development and remote work. And I think in terms of learning, I think the really useful rule of thumb that's really helped me a lot is only learning things that are directly related to one specific thing that I'm working on right now, so that I'm not just, kid in a candy store picking up all these little interesting tidbits all over the place, so that it's related to something that I'm actually doing. I mean, in terms of the practice. I mean, it's usually I'm reading, I'm listening to things like podcasts or audiobooks or something, and then trying to figure out how I can run a small experiment or help a team run a small experiment around the thing that I'm trying to solve. And and by experiment, it doesn't need to be like this big formal thing where a hypothesis and all of that, but it's more like if I make a small change, how's that going to change how the team works, how things are going to happen. So for example, one of my favorite series of experiments were around meetings and doing things like canceling meetings, moving to completely like this kind of operation meeting that like development teams have, moving them to occasional ones, moving them to Slack-based ones, all kinds of iterations around that, and getting the right environment for that particular set of individuals to come together and work effectively, instead of telling them that you must meet at 1 p.m. GMT every day, and all of that kind of thing. So again, it's around creating that collaborative environment that helps them work together and finish bits of work quickly, effectively, right?
Talking about meetings, obviously, I mean, meetings are, they're important, but it's important to get meetings right and making sure that you're being as productive as you can without, like you said, the Zoom doom, there's so many things, or so many apps you can use to meet people these days, aren't there? There's so many that you can use that literally all do the same thing, but you see and you hear online lots of people complaining about how often they're meeting and what they're talking about during meetings going on over time, and meetings sort of basically enveloping the whole day and not allowing them to do the work that they want to do. I don't know if you want to talk about, Luke, how you do it within your context, but how do you go about making sure or getting the meetings right for you and your team?
So there is a place for meetings, whereas in terms of deciding things and coming together to decide really important things that need to happen quickly, I think the challenge has been for a lot of companies now with the pandemic, with the large amount of meetings, is that meetings are being used, for example, or misappropriated, I guess is the word, right? So using for tracking status, whereas you can, or kind of trying to create deadlines, so create false urgency by scheduling a meeting on Friday so that a piece of work is done by Friday, that kind of thing, as opposed to genuinely being used to come together and decide things, celebrate things. And there's a lot of work which is done into meetings, which in fact could be done asynchronously. So it could be done based on writing something up, having someone else look at it, more email, more like it doesn't need to always be everyone physically getting together just to talk about every little detail. And I think the art and science of it is like figuring out, when you do have a workflow of meetings, like which meetings are necessary, which meetings aren't, and then how, of the meetings that aren't, what are other ways or better ways that you can achieve the same goal without organizing a meeting or a regular meeting, basically. And I think, again, a lot of this goes back to really having clear objectives, because if you have that, and then you take each meeting, you go through your Outlook calendar and you look at, is this particular meeting helping me achieve this particular objective that I have, or any of these three objectives that I have? And if the answer is no, then it's like, well, first of all, do we need it at all? If we don't, cancel it, obviously. If we still need something about it, is there another way of achieving that, right? So just having people email you, what they did today, for example, or this week or something, if it is status, right? Or so coming up with creative ways of addressing the actual business need without necessarily defaulting to a meeting. And yeah, it does require a good amount of self-awareness of the companies and the individuals in the companies to do that. But I think the ones who do get it right, you can have most of the week relatively free of meetings. And if particularly when we're talking about within a larger company and you're organizing the work, like I don't necessarily think you need that many, but again, it's very industry context specific. So it just it's case by case basis.
No, definitely, and it can really. I mean, I've spoken to people who can really sap the life out of, literally sap the life and energy from you when you're going from one meeting to another. And speaking to somebody the other day who will remain nameless, but he was literally spending 2-3 hours sometimes a day in meetings. And by the time he'd finished the meeting, he was so exhausted he wasn't able to do the work he was supposed to be doing, or at least he wasn't at a point where he was at his best to do the work. And I think it just got out of control. But I think he's getting on top of it now, and I gave him a bit of advice, because I think what he was doing was he actually wasn't sharing his calendar enough. I think people were just booking stuff in here, there, and everywhere, and literally was overlapping with his work time. So he's starting to get a solution now. But I know there's lots of people out there who are really struggling, and it can, like I said, it can really take the life out of people, and you can take the fun out of work as well. Because I mean, you can't just be working all the time. You have to have a bit of downtime. It has to be a bit of fun, because that's after all is what helps you to, well, in many teams, in many cultures, not all cultures, but it can help to really bring people together. How do you organize your team, or a team? How would you recommend organizing a team so that it's effective, engaged, and fun?
So I think in terms of fun, I think fun is in a way the starting point. So I think usually there's a number of things that the team is aware of that aren't maybe quite so fun, like things that are holding them back. Again, coming from the assumption that people, want to do a good job, work through, identify all of those things, put them in one place on a shared spreadsheet or on some kind of a backlog, and go through them one by one. Then I think together with the team, design some kind of a process for how they do the work, so that they get real time information as to how they're doing. So what I mean by this is there's I guess I'm trying to think how to do it in a non-software way or a non-manufacturing way. I mean, so I guess the way that I think about it is that you have a unit of thing that if you want to create something like, I don't know, say a bicycle, how quickly you can get the whole team to create that bicycle, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then you've got a time of how long it takes to create a bicycle, right? So that bicycle can be whatever it is that your company works on. And then that gives you some kind of a number that everyone's aware of. It's relatively objective. And then you can use it to help work with the team in a fun way, in my opinion. Maybe I'm biased, but so that you work together to try to improve how long it takes to make that bicycle. And then as part of that, come up with ways of automating things, documenting things. You can get creative in terms of how to do that. And I think that combination of things, I think, gets people engaged, and in fact, they want to create a place of work where they enjoy working, and I think it's very much up to the team leader to organize that, and to do so very consciously and explicitly. And I think that combination of things is probably a way to do exactly that. So,
and on that, talking about work, and obviously, and I was talking about giving you my example of the guy who literally has his life sapped from him from all these meetings, and it's affected, and it overlapped into his day-to-day work. And then before he knew it, the work he was supposed to have done on that day was going into the next day, and so on and so forth. And he was just really having a hard time. He was struggling with his productivity. Like I said, one of the things I recommended to him was basically get his diary right, get his shared calendar right, and setting out what he was going to do the day before. I mean, all the basic stuff. But do you have any? I mean, why do companies, in your opinion, Luke, often get productivity wrong? I mean, it was a big example that I gave you just now, but why do you think that they get productivity wrong?
So, I think just off the back of the example that you're talking about, I mean, the insight that I find really useful is from a guy named Paul Graham, who's a VC from back in the day. But basically, at the individual level, there's people who are managers and who like being managers, and the productivity is based on meetings and decisions. Then there's people who are creative and they create things and they work on things. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the challenge companies have is because the two sides are assuming things about each other that aren't necessarily true. So particularly managers assuming that people who want to do the work, right? So this is essentially a discussion of getting the balance right between doing the work versus thinking about the work or talking about the work that needs to be done. And usually the way to diagnose this, in my opinion, is to basically make sure there's enough time to actually do the work. And if that means using something as simple as a time block in Outlook, where these 3 hours, don't schedule a meeting on top of this, and then anyone who tries to say no, right? So set that boundary. So then you've got those 3 hours where you can go and actually do the work that you want to do, or that you're expected to do, depending on the context, or others are expecting you to do. At the same time, you don't want to completely block out 8 hours a day of that and just go off into your own little corner and do your thing, because what you're doing, if you're working in a team context, might not sync well with what everyone else is doing if everybody's sitting in their own corner doing their own thing. So it is a balance, right? I think, looking at people's calendars when you're in a team context is a good place to start in terms of having that discussion and getting the right mix there.
No, thank you. And it's interesting. Like I said, this I couldn't believe it when again talking about this guy, that it wasn't really they just started working remotely, but they weren't used to it, to be fair to them. So, but they didn't even share calendars. They literally didn't share anything. They didn't have any sort of cloud-based things like Google Drive or anything like that they were using. It was just all all on their desktop, and they were suddenly into a situation where they're having to change all their working practices and their mindset, and it was a bit of a panic. I mean, I think they're slowly but surely getting to grips with it and making their way through it. And I mean, they're doing a good job, but it is, I have to say, it's taking its toll. But no,
Yeah.
Luke, thank you so much. Tell us a bit more about launch tomorrow and what you're doing at the moment and what your plans are for the
Yeah,
foreseeable future.
sure. So launch tomorrow is kind of the innovation consulting thing that I did spinning off. I also wrote a book specifically on idea testing, market testing. Initially, that was the first book, and then this. So I still do help companies with that. Sometimes it's startups, sometimes it's larger companies where there are larger teams that need to be run. And then Align Remotely is kind of more just the remote work stuff. The second book, and so it's at this point it's all kind of melded into one. To be honest, as it has for many people, I don't think I'm unique in that particular sense. But yeah, I mean it's. I think the creativity, the distributed creativity piece is the one that people find reasonably hard, and I think that's the piece that I think is really where I feel like I'm most helpful to companies at the moment, figuring out how to get groups of people to be creative when they can't physically be together in one workshop room. so yeah, that's pretty much Launch Tomorrow in a nutshell.
And you can find Launch Tomorrow at www.launchtomorrow.com. I definitely recommend having a look at that. We're going to include that in the show notes as well. But Luke Shermer, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today on the Remote Work Life podcast. We're looking out for what you're doing. And it's been great having you today.